Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us again. And it's always a pleasure. It's always a nice group, and it's always nice to have new people, and of course, all the regulars that come. So we're actually today, we're gonna finish the first section, chapter 1, as they call it, in the Chafetz Chaim, in the book that we're learning. Again, just a reminder, we're learning Master Your Words, and if you still need a book, if you're on Facebook and you haven't had a book, please feel free to contact me. We still have a couple left. And we're gonna, day 22 is the last section of the last day of chapter 1. Then we're gonna start chapter 2. So it's an exciting day. We're gonna go from one chapter to the next chapter. And actually it works out nicely, just sort of, not so connected to these laws, but it's something important to remember. Whenever we finish a Masechta, a chapter, a tractate, a parsha, something, it's always good and it's always important to remember that we should always start the next thing right away. This happens to work out that way. If we would have, finished off last week, the other one, we would have stopped, right?
Avi,
yes.
I'm sorry. Pardon me for interrupting.
No problem.
Since we're at the beginning, there's just static when you talk, intermittent static. If you backed up a little bit,
that better?
Yeah, because when you person in your office and you spoke to them last week, it was really clear, and then you started talking to us again. I think you just get really excited talking to us, and
I will move back. I'll move back. There we go. That's better. Now you see my whole face and my shoulder.
Thank you.
Okay, so is that better? Just give me a thumbs up. Good. Okay. Thank you, Jim. It's always important to make sure that there's no static. Static in life is also a problem. We'll talk about that in the morning minute today. But so just as I was saying, it's important to remember that when you finish something, you should really start the next thing. It happens to work out that we're doing that, even if it's a chapter, if it's a tractate, if it's a parsha. There's a lot of people that actually on every Shabbos, before Mincha or by Mincha time, actually start the next parsha. Actually, by Mincha on Shabbos, the afternoon prayer, we start reading the next parsha for the coming week. Now, it's part because we finished the parsha, but also the idea of you should never feel that you finished. In Torah, we're never, we're done. We finished the tractate, we finished the parsha, we finished the Torah. Right? On Simchas Torah, what do? We start Bereshis all over again. We have Chassan Torah, and then we have Chassan Bereshis, right? It's important to remember in life, and especially in learning, one should never feel like they're done. And so this happened to work out nicely today, and I always say it's sort of like a kiss on the forehead from God that it happened to work out this way, but I think it's just really cool. We're finishing one chapter, or we're starting the next chapter in the same day. If I start the chapters, then we'll get there. But if I just keep on, talking. Okay, so let's get cracking over here. So
Rabbi,
day 20. Yes.
Sorry, I'm getting a lot of static still.
Oh.
Is anyone else getting? I don't know.
How about now?
Yes, a lot of static. I think as soon as you put the recording on, or as soon as you put it to Facebook, that's when it started.
Okay, so I hope we figured that all out. I'm really going to try really hard not to move too much. So let's start day 22. Let's just get cracking and let's get to it. So it's a very interesting question, dilemma. The dilemma is, so you're going to say this sounds similar to what we spoke about in the past, but it's actually a little different. So let's look at it very closely. Now, your children's struggle in yeshiva really gives is this the one? No, sorry, day 21. We didn't do day 21. I apologize. We have two now of day 21. You know a girl who in high school was kicked out of class, right? Always a troublemaker, never didn't really behave well in school, right? And she put herself together. 15 years later, she put herself together. We all know those people. I look at myself. I wasn't a troublemaker, right? But we all had we say, well, when we were younger, right? And now she's all put together. But this was a real troublemaker. Really kicked out. Really had a hard time. She put herself together. She became a powerhouse. she's a business person, a successful housewife, business, community person. Lady, man, doesn't make a difference. I don't know why they just put it this way. Now, your neighbor recently made her acquaintance, right? And she said, "Oh my gosh, this person's so great, right? Unbelievable. She's such an inspiration." And you want to add her glory. You're doing this for a positive thing. You want to add on to her glory. And you say like this. You say, you want to know how great she is? She came from so far. She's come so much since she was younger. You know when she was younger, she was a troublemaker. You know when she was younger, she was, and you want to add on to her glory. So you're doing this for something positive, not something positive like we spoke about beforehand, where it was someone trying to educate someone. You see that person, you're talking about someone else, right? And you say, look, they put their lives on together. You could also do that. So it's more of a lesson. Over here, you're trying to add on glory to this person by saying, look how far she's so successful. And can you imagine when she was in high school, she got kicked out? And look at her now. Look at him now. Are you allowed to say that or not? So you're trying to make it more positive. You're trying to make it greater, right? And over here, but at the same time, something negative is going to come out. So the halacha is like this, and this is called avak lashon hara. The Chafetz Chaim speaks about this at length, and he has a lot of different categories that fall under avak lashon hara, and it's going to be the next one also that we're going to talk about avak lashon hara. Avak lashon hara means to say the dust. Avak is dust. Dust of lashon hara means to say it's not the actual laws of lashon hara, because again your intentions are for good, and you're not meaning to harm the person, and it might not harm the person. It might say, "Oh my gosh, it's unbelievable, right? It's come so far. Look at this life story, right? It's something unbelievable." And the person themselves might talk about it. If the person themselves talks about it, that's something else. Whoever has some background noise, please just mute yourself. And they themselves might talk about it. If they talk about it extensively, that's something else, because then it's considered like everybody knows. But in this scenario, the person doesn't talk about it. So it's called avak lashon hara. It says Chafetz Chaim, yesh dvarim she'asurim etam avak lashon hara. There are certain things that are prohibited because of the avak, the dust of lashon hara. It's seemingly like lashon hara. Kedgon, like so Omer, that he says, Misha haya Omer al ploni say kamoshu ata. Whoa, do you know how he was? Right? This person was unbelievable. This person has gone so far. And avak lashon hara is prohibited rabbinically because there might be, you are still saying something negative about the person, even though, right, it's meant for something positive. Now, if the person themselves talks about it, and this is very important, right? People talk about their life history. People talk about, how they've grown, their transformation, and things like that. So then, if that person talks about it publicly, so then you could talk about it. But over here, where not necessarily person talks about it, right? So even though you are trying to say something positive, that is considered avak lashon hara, and you're not allowed to do that. And avak lashon hara is not the same as lashon hara to the extent, meaning to say that it is the biblical prohibition of when you are meaning to say something negative, it's automatic that the words that you're going to say are something negative, but it's even in a way where it might come out something negative that you are saying. Any questions on that? Okay, so let's move on. Day 22, what we were saying beforehand. So this is a very interesting case, right? This is something that is extremely practical, something that happens, unfortunately, many times, and it's again in the category of avak lashon hara. The scenario that they give is a scenario with tuition. And so whoever is in charge of the tuition breaks on the board, or if it's a school that has an executive director and that person takes care of tuition, however way the school is made up, or, discounts of organization, whatever it is, right? A lot of times there's a whole committee or the person that decides who gets a break, who doesn't get a break. And so let's give this example. Your children's struggling yeshiva rarely gives tuition breaks. On the other hand, many parents, right, try to get tuition breaks if they have a little money. They don't, if they're just, they want to have I'll tell you a funny story. My father told me that in his school, one time he's not in charge of the tuition. He said right away, I don't deal with that stuff. I have an exec director that takes care of that. And he said one time, someone pulls up for a tuition meeting with the exec director, like in a very fancy car, extremely fancy car. All right, like they said, like you don't come to a tuition, meeting to try to get a tuition break with a very fancy car. You say we're not judging. Could be you got it from someone. Could be this. Could be that. But you got to have a little seichel. When you're trying to portray that you need the help, right? You don't show up in a certain way. So it's many different people that try to get tuition breaks for whatever reason, right? They might need it, right? They might want to go on another vacation, and if they get a tuition break, then they're able to, right? For whatever reason that may be. Now, this year, you actually received a tuition break because of a certain circumstance that happened. You had an extreme car broke down, other medical expenses, and you actually got one. Right? Now, the head of tuition committee was very generous and gave you tuition. May you praise that person to your neighbors and say, right, who also have children in school, say, wow, Chaim Yanko was really generous this year and he gave us a nice tuition break. Please mute yourself. There's a lot of background noise. So are you allowed to praise that person? Again, so it's a similar thing where you're praising the person. The difference is the way you praised the person last time was by saying, oh my gosh, you know where they came from. So you're actually saying something negative. You're not saying anything negative. You're not saying anything negative. You're praising the person. So what could be wrong with this? Why should you not allow, right, to say a praise to this person? Oh my gosh, it's so nice. I'm Uncle gave me a tuition break. So any thoughts? Anybody?
Rabbi?
Yes.
Hi. This is Lisa.
My daughter.
That's I'm off. So I'm just listening in. There's a saying called "the road to hell is paved with good intentions." I don't know if you've ever heard that before.
Right.
Sort of like the same thing that you're saying.
Right. So the question is, why is this just good intentions, and why would you end up in hell, as the expression that the saying that you said?
It's the expression.
Right.
Because what you need to do is be able to know what you're saying is also good, and that it needs to be positive, even though because what you're saying is actually negative.
So the question is, where is the negative in what you're saying? What you're saying is, thank you to this person that gave me a discount. Where is the negative in what you're saying? What is the negative in what you're saying? So this shows you how far Avak Lashon Hara goes and how far the rabbis have thought about people's feelings and the outcome of our words, especially our actions. Right? So the halacha is that since it's something that other people have tried to get, tuition breaks. That's just the example we're giving. Getting a ticket to a certain show, a free ticket to certain things, or whatever it is. Being able to hang out with someone on their yacht, right? Whatever the scenario is. There's many different kinds of scenarios. Right? The outcome of your words can make other people, and maybe that's what you meant, it can make other people resent that person or even talk negative about that person. And eventually might even come to some financial harm. And it might come, the person says, oh, the person, that tuition break, or maybe because they're good neighbors, maybe because they're good friends, and that person will lose their job, or even if it doesn't go to that extent, unfortunately, we live in a society that people, and this really is a good segue to the next section, unfortunately, we live in a society that people cannot just be happy for something good that happens to you. And they're constantly thinking why that didn't happen to us. Right? And therefore, even with you praising that person, right? You praise that person could get harmed by praising them because it's a scenario of other people might want something similar. That is called Avak Lashon Hara. And that's something extremely important to remember. Another example, which the Talmud tells us, and this is one of the places we learned this from, and it could be they're going to give this example later, but I didn't look through the whole book. I think it's important to remember, and it sounds a little interesting, but it really puts things in perspective. you ate by someone, you went to someone, you got the meal was excellent, right? It was great hospitality. They picked you up. You're from out of town, right? And you go back to your city and say, oh my gosh, I went to Jacksonville and Yetzim Putzel's house was excellent. They're the greatest hosts, right? They gave us the best food, right? It was unbelievable. You're praising the person. You're talking about helping the person out. The Talmud says you have to be very careful. The Talmud says you have to be very careful how and when you say the praises, because now this person that helped you out, unless this is like their thing, they do achnasas archim, right? They host people, they constantly they do it. Now someone else might call them, and they did you a favor, they helped you out, you're in a punch. But now that you're praising them, and people, oh, let's go to Jacksonville and we'll stay by this person, or we'll eat by that person. Oh my gosh, they're unbelievable. Financially, it could start getting expensive. Hosting people, making larger meals, buying more chicken, buying more food, to get financially more expensive. The Talmud says you have to be careful. You have to be very careful when and how you praise someone, even something like that of the hospitality, because the outcome, and it could be not right now, it could be tomorrow, a month from now. There could be a negative outcome, not negative necessarily like we spoke about now, where people will talk bad about this person or people will resent that person, but a financial problem, because now more people are asking that person to be hosted or to have meals. That's how far the Talmud tells us one has to. It's under our vak lashon hara. It's not lashon hara because you're not actually speaking negative about the person, but it's under the category of a vak lashon hara, the dust of lashon hara, the outcome of lashon hara. Because again, as we mentioned many times, lashon hara, right, is when a negative outcome comes to someone, right, from what you said. Any questions or comments on that before we move on? Oh, wow, you're all very quiet today. Okay.
No. Well, how are you supposed to praise a person? I say in this incident.
So you just say, I had a very good question, Marilyn. So you say, Jacksonville, for example, right? Jacksonville, I went to Jacksonville. The people there were really nice. They, they put me up, and everything was really great there. I say, I see about that. And they put out a 5-court. They were unbelievable. They just went all out. It was, so even though you're putting adjectives to your praise, right? But again, through doing that and mentioning a certain person, it might, something negative might come out of it.
Yeah.
So
Okay. You just have to.
And in the case over here of the scholarship, you should not praise this person. If something negative is going to come out, it's a private thing. Other people are going to get hurt. Yes, you should not praise this person. You could write them a thank you letter, right? And you should write them a thank you letter when you see them in private, right? Say, oh, thank you so much. It's really nice of you to consider this and to help us out. But to go ahead and praise a person in public, actually, you should not, right? This is a scenario, as we said before. Sometimes, the path to, is paved with good intentions. Because even though you think you're doing the right thing, let me glorify this person, but actually that person could get hurt. So in this scenario, you should not praise that person. Anybody else?
Rabbi,
Yeah, go ahead.
what about like people who donate lots of money and they get recognized for their generosity? How is that any different? Because then people are going to go to them all the time asking for money. How is that different?
Excellent question, Cindy. Excellent question. So I typically, when I ask someone, right, for a larger donation, right, I ask them a lot of times, is this anonymous, or is it okay with you if we, if we mention your name, if we put it on a plaque, if we put it on a flyer, right? Someone sponsors something, I ask them all the time. And you should. You have to. You're right. A lot of times people will say, sorry, I moved. A lot of times people will say, I want to do this anonymously, but a good fundraiser or a good person that's asking people for money should ask the person, is it okay with you, if we mention you. And I've had people, we had a discussion, the pros and cons. Some people also don't want to be mentioned because they don't want to be show-offy in front of other people, right? That's sometimes people told me they don't want to be mentioned. Other times it has to do with your concern. Other people are going to come and ask them for money. I mean, there's the pros and cons. I tell them I hear, but it's also good for the synagogue, for the organization. Other people see that people are sponsoring, people are donating. There's pros and cons to everything. With one person, he said the real large donation, I don't want to be mentioned. For the smaller ones, right, the sponsoring of this, a sponsoring of that, like the small ones, that's okay. One person was, a one-time mention, right, even though it's an ongoing kind of thing. And sort of that was, the thing. So every person you have to work something out with, but you're 100% correct. This is something that people have to be aware of and thinking about. You can't just go ahead and thank someone for in public, right? In a forum of social media, newsletters and things like that, if that's going to harm the person. You're 100% correct, Cindy.
So we just have to get permission?
You have to get permission. Yeah.
I just want to say, like, in the fundraising stuff that I've been involved in, I can't tell you how many like bad Lashon Hara conversations have come from, but so, Mr. and Mrs. Jones just donated $50,000 to this organization. They only gave us $1,000. Like, it's so hard not to fall into down that rabbit hole. I mean, it's like, you know what I'm saying? When someone's name is mentioned, it sets up a whole, like a whole series of expectations. And so often I've heard so many negative comments. Oh, but they gave so much to this. How come they're not giving to this?
You're right. You're 100% correct. And that's something that the people that are involved in fundraisers, and if you remember correctly, we spoke about this similar kind of situation earlier when, the scenario we gave was when the yeshiva sent out boys, right? Or if it's, parents of a school that were asked to speak to, or an organization to ask to speak to the big donor, right? And a general fundraiser, and the person gave, $18 or $36 or $100, right? And you could say, oh my gosh, this person should have given so much. And if you remember, we spoke about that scenario. Are you allowed to, are you allowed to mention to other people how much that person gave you? Because other people, I mean, just like you said, other people might say, he only gave you $100. The guy, is worth, $200 million. The guy's worth $1 million. The guy's worth 100,000, whatever it is, right? He only gave you $18. We spoke, you're not allowed to even mention how much this person gave you because of that, what other people might say. Like Emily, like you said, right? How other people might react. Remember, we said, he gave a nice donation. I'm just a parent of the community of the school. I'm sure, when the principal or the executive director calls him, I'm sure he gives a larger amount. Right? There's ways of speaking about it if you're pressed and people are harassing you, because if you say nothing, sometimes, as we spoke about, saying nothing also implies. And we spoke about last week, you're not allowed to do Lashon Hara in an implied way either. That's hinting. But you have to come up with some kind of line, right? By saying, I'm just a parent, I'm sure he gives the executive director, or, he's given, so many other great organizations, this year he decided to switch around. And Emily, when that comes up amongst fundraisers, right, amongst people that are in charge and they should be getting the big money from that person when they ask, quote unquote, since they are the principal, the executive director, or the head of the chair of the fundraising of that year, right? When that comes up in conversation, then you have to have a conversation and say, every person has their priorities for that year. And if they decided to give another organization, right? So they've given another organization, and maybe we'll get another year, or maybe their priorities change. It's not for us to decide how people give their money and how they donate their money. All right, we just have to be grateful for the money that we do fundraise and the money that we do get. That's sort of a way of changing the conversation when that, especially in a level of when I can't say, if the executive director asked them, or if the principal asked them, or if the head of the committee asked them, whatever it is, because we are that group, right? So again, you still have to figure out a way of being able to change the conversation. But over here, right, like you said, Cindy, if the person does not give permission, or if you didn't ask the person permission, if you could mention them, then you really shouldn't mention them. When it's like a general thing, and so, like sometimes we put out people that donated for the Yom Kippur Appeal. We don't say amounts, right? We just write a thank you to those that donate. So there's 50 people on there, so that's very different. Right? We're not saying an amount. Thank you for sponsoring, the parochas, right? Parochas is $5,000, right? So people know, right? That's a big thing. Right? But when you just sort of a general fundraiser and just mention names, right? Unless the person specifically tells you they don't want their name even mentioned on there, so then you can't put it there. But generally, then that's considered something that it's part of a list of names. It's not saying how much. Person could give 18,000, 10,000, right? So then that's very different. When it's a specific program, a specific thing, or a specific amount, then you're right. People can either talk, one my organization, like Emily said, or Cindy, like you said, where people go over and try to get more money out of the person. It might be harmful for that person. You're 100% correct. We have to think about all things. It's all part of a Vak Lashon Hara. Okay. Let's move on. We are moving on to the next chapter. And the next chapter called Havat Yisrael, unity as Hashem's children. Havat Yisrael is the love of Israel. And that's a literal translation. They add on unity as Hashem's children. So I want to read this paragraph because I think it's a very important paragraph. Those who feel a love bond with their fellow Jews have had a hard time hearing or saying anything negative about them. That's why building our senses of Havat Yisrael is one of the fundamental ways to drive Lashon Hara out of our lives. No matter what divides us, we could stand together with compassion and care for each other, giving our Father the ultimate nachas. It is extremely hard to, let me rephrase this. How many times have you heard in a healthy situation, of course, right? How many times have you heard, a parent or a child, really bad-mouthing their child or their parent. Right? Okay, child to parents sometimes if they're teenagers, we're not talking about that. That's like a special scenario, teenager years. Right? But, on a typical, someone that you love, a good dear friend, you're able to take every situation. Oh, my tata will never do anything wrong, right? You every situation you're able to translate, you're able to find the positive in what happened. To the extent that actually sometimes, right, teachers have a hard time dealing with parents because the parents can never believe that their kid would do anything wrong. Totally. I mean, this is how far this goes. Sometimes parents have to realize that their kids are not perfect, right? And the teacher is right, right? And they do have to deal with some issues that the kids have. Not saying they're bad, but issues that the kids have. But to the extent that it is in our nature that people that we love, people that we care about, we don't see the negative. Right? We don't see the negative. It's part of our nature. And therefore, the more we build, and that's chapter 2, the more we build our Havat Yisrael, our love for our fellow, right? The more we build this concept of recognizing, right, that we are family, the quicker Lashon Hara will cease to exist. Because you don't want to say negative things about your family, about your loved ones. It will cease to exist. All right, so the chapter 2 deals with different exercises, different things to think about of how to build our love for our fellow. And I know I'm being recorded, so I'll be careful what I say. And I think this is something that we all have to work on, right? Generally, not only Havat Yisrael. Havat Yisrael is our love of our fellow, but we have to work on Havat Adam, the love of humanity, right? The love of every individual. We all have differences. We all have different things that will say, I can't believe that person said this. I can't believe they told that, right? And as we said, people do negative things. It's part of humanity. It's part of who we are, right? As King Solomon said, "And tzedek ba'aretz lo yachta," there's not a righteous person in the world that doesn't sin. There's no one that doesn't do something negative, something wrong, right? Sometimes it has a greater influence and sometimes it's not so much. Doesn't mean to say the person shouldn't, that individual, right, shouldn't be called out on it, shouldn't, consequences shouldn't come out from the actions. But at the same time, we have to realize that if we build our love for our fellow man, for our fellow person, this negative rhetoric that's flying around will cease to exist. An actual positive actions will be taken, right? And a true building and unity could be built through that. When we're constantly looking at the negative of someone else, we're constantly allowing the differences to create hatred. I'll tell you something mind-boggling that I heard the other day. I heard this from someone, a rabbi of a community, told this to a friend of mine who told it to me, right? No names were mentioned, of course, right? But just to show that a couple came to him and said, Rabbi, we need to get divorced. He said, like, what's going on? They have kids, right? They've been married for about 15 years. He said, like, what's going on? I said, well, me and my wife, we have different political views. And it's got to it gets so intense that we can't live with each other. We can't find eye and eye on anything. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how far this is taken? And I've mentioned it before. The people, I don't care what side you are, it doesn't make a difference to me. It doesn't make a difference. People have not let their parents see their kids. People have not, siblings have not talked to each other. Friends have broken up and are not having Friday night dinners together anymore. I don't care what you hold. That's not, as I said, this is not what we're talking about. I'm never going to talk about that. I don't care how many times people ask me what my view is or what's my response. Right? I've been asked. I'm never going to talk about it. What I will talk about is, why don't you ask, how are we able to build the differences? How are we able to build Avat Yisrael? How are we able to build the love for our fellow man? How are we able to bridge the gaps and find the positive in things and not the negative in things? And yes, we have differences. And yes, some differences make a tremendous ramifications. And yes, some people on all sides have said things and have created things that have hurt people, and they should be prosecuted. And on all sides, I'm not talking about any individual. Okay, for the last 10 months, there's been many, unfortunately, people that have been harmed and hurt emotionally, physically, politically. But if we could work on building our differences and realize that people have differences and deal with them in the right way, then this whole negative rhetoric, this whole hatred and families breaking up will cease to exist. Because why can't we agree to disagree? So you believe one thing, I believe another. That should make a difference of how we like each other. That should make a difference of what school we're sending our kids to. Let's make a difference if we could enjoy a good movie together. Let's make a difference if we could enjoy a good Friday night meal and talk about, I don't know what. There's so many other things that we could talk about, so many other things that we could have a good time and find our common ground. And I think if we all work on this, as they said in the paragraph, right? Remember, what divides us? We could stand together with compassion and care for each other, giving our Father the ultimate nachas. And that's what this section is all about. And I apologize if I went off topic, right? But I think it's something extremely important to think about and to reflect on. You know, we all, I'm talking to myself, we all have to work on this. We all have to work on it. It's part of our unfortunate nature to find the negative unless we realize that we're really family. Unless we realize that we're brothers and sisters. Unless we build that love for each other, a dear, good friendship that can endure, right? Differences. That's the ultimate goal. So we have a couple more minutes left. Let's just do this one halacha day 23 that we start off. So the scenario is like this, right? Move into a new neighborhood next door to your friend's grumpy next door, right, to your friend's grumpy old widow's uncle, right? You move into a neighborhood, right? Next door is your friend's grumpy old widowed uncle. Right? He already asked you to keep your children off his driveway, right? To mow your lawn only after 11 a.m., right? Not to have too many companies, not to park in front of his lawn, right? We've all had, neighbors like this. Right? Now your friend, right, says, oh, how do you like my uncle? Now that's the example they give over here. Right? How do you like my uncle? And you want to say, he's so irritating. Right? He's grumpy. Right? May you say, I'd rather not answer that one. And the answer is, of course not. Right? Saying you don't want to answer implies, like we spoke about before, right, avak lashon hara, right, implies that what you have said is negative. Therefore, the answer is still avak lashon hara. In this situation, correct response would be, he seems like a nice man. And leave it at that. He seems like a nice man. Right? I'm sure he's a nice man. He just, certain things irritate him, right? And it interferes with, my life as having children, and my children like, driving their tricycles or bicycles, and we have, a lot of guests over, whatever it is. But that doesn't define the person. You hear? When you change your mindset of how to view scenarios and things, those things do not define the person. You could understand why certain people have certain things that bother them. And now that is a conflict with you right now. That doesn't mean to say that that person's a bad person. Doesn't define the person as a whole. And especially to someone that is close to them, or to any person, by talking negative, you're creating a friction. You're creating a separation of ahava, of love, of friendship. So you just say, he seems like a nice man, and leave it at that, and don't take it any further. That is a great example, right, of where deflecting a question that you ask or deflecting a conversation, right, to make sure that you don't even get into a situation where you harm anybody. You say a powerful answer, as we say, right? You don't have to, oh, he's awesome, he's great. You're lying, because right now he's not awesome, great to you. And then it might entice more questions. Oh, really? What are you doing? Yeah. Just say a very simple answer. Sometimes the most simple answer is the best answer, because it does not invite more questions. It does not invite to dig deeper into the scenario, into the situation, and that's a lot of times what we have to do. Right? It's just that we'll end with this. Idea. Right? There's one of the mitzvahs of the Torah. If you look at page 99, right? Believe you can. Right? One of the mitzvahs of the Torah is that do not hate your brother in the heart. Right? That's one of the mitzvahs of the Torah. It's a verse in Leviticus, Vayikra. And do not hate do not hate your brother in your heart. Right? So some would say, how's that possible? Right? Me not hate someone, especially in my heart, right? How's that possible? So Rav Yerucham Levavitz makes a point to point out that one always has to remember that the Torah, the 613 commandments, were not given just to the righteous. That's a righteous person, not to hate your brother. And the brother doesn't mean necessarily brother. It's the way the Torah talks about humanity, right? It's not, the Torah was not given just to the righteous. The 613 mitzvahs were given to each one of us. At whatever level we are on, if God gave it to us, it means to say that we could do it. It's within us to overcome our challenges, whatever they are, whatever 613 mitzvot they are. But especially this one. Says Rav Yerucham Levavitz, this is not meant for the righteous, tzaddik. This is meant for every person. And if the Torah is telling us that we could do this, that means to say that we could do it. Right? We could overcome this concept of finding the hatred, but on the contrary, finding the positive, or staying powerful. So let's all focus on this, and let's think about this as we start chapter 2, when we go into this very important chapter of thinking about others, right? And building that. The more we build on that, the more we work on that, the easier will be not to speak Lashon Hara. The easier will be to, as we spoke about so many times beforehand, building those radars, right? Thinking ahead of the conversations that you're having with this individual. And if you know that you have two different political opinions, don't bring it up. And that's why I don't talk about people. I don't know, some I do know, so I don't know. I don't care. I really don't. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't define the person and what their political opinion is. So avoid certain conversations. The more you build the wanting to have a relationship with someone else, the more those radars that we spoke about, those noticing the blimps, right? Changing the conversation, avoiding a conversation, the more will become part of you, because you want to be that, my tatala doesn't do anything wrong, right? My friend, my good friend, doesn't mean to say they don't do anything wrong, but I'm not going to find the negative in that. And therefore, I don't want to talk about certain scenarios, talk about certain cases, certain topics that will lead to that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just a quick reminder that Monday at 12, we have a special speaker, Nissim Black, and we're very excited. He's talking about his life from gangster to God. And please join us. You have to register for that. The registration link is on our WhatsApp page. It's on Eitz Chaim website. It's on Facebook. It's on Instagram. So please find somewhere, register for that. Please feel free to share it. Maybe teenagers, maybe young adults, right? It should be fascinating and exciting. So the more the merrier, and we look forward to that. And there's some more exciting programs that we have scheduled. We're starting a history course in February with Ken Spiro. That's Sunday mornings, 2 weeks in February, 2 weeks in March. And we're going to have an exciting speaker, Judge Ruchi Freyer, first female from judge from New York. And she'll be speaking the 25th. And a flyer will be coming out for that also. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I'm going to turn off the recording now. Okay, recording off.